Hi, welcome. Hello, welcome to GellerFest. It's going to be a good crowd and a good day. All right. So, good afternoon. I'm Jamie Edgen, chair of the psychology department. Before we get started, I want to just give some housekeeping about the speakers. Welcome everybody coming from all over the United States to celebrate Scott. If you're a speaker today, we are recording on Zoom, so keep that in mind about how you travel across the room. I know I'm like one of those people that wants to wander around and talk with everybody, but we'll lose you on Zoom if you go sort of outside the screen area here. So please try to stay close to the podium so we pick you up. Today we celebrate an extraordinary legacy, 56 continuous years of excellence in science, scholarships, and exceptional instruction at Virginia Tech. First, I'd like to thank everyone who made this day possible. This includes the College of Science Dean's Office and Jenny Orsolak, Director of Development, whose efforts brought us here today. I also want to thank Ivan Savelyev, the Student Director of the Center for Applied Behavioral Systems. Was I hearing a clap? Yay! Hey, CABS! And generally just the whole CABS group, because you are so amazing and so supportive of Scott and have a just incredible group of students that Scott has put together. I also want to thank Joanne Dean, whose dedication to CABS, Scott, and his legacy has been invaluable. And finally, a special thank you to Dr. Geller's daughter, Dr. Krista Geller, who will serve as our MC today. She earned her PhD from Virginia Tech in 2005. So thank you all for being here. So now I'd like you to join me in welcoming Dr. Kevin Pitts, Dean of the College of Science, who will honor Dr. Geller with a few words. Take it over, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and it's great to see you all, and those of you who are on Zoom, thanks for joining us. One of the secrets of being a dean is to know when you're not the focal point of an event and when someone else very special is. So I'm not going to be up here for long, so you can hear from other speakers. But it is really an honor for me to be with you today to celebrate Scott, a true Virginia Tech icon whose influence spans more than 5 decades. Scott has achieved the true triple crown in my book, and that is impact, legacy, and longevity. And it's exciting to be here to see amazing examples of all three that are here from the speakers.
Close it. You'll have to go back to the Kudo board to hear the rest of it. So funny. Apologies for that. You're back.
Let the record show that I rock the house. So as I said, impact, legacy, longevity. So I came to Virginia Tech a short 53 years after Scott, but I didn't have to be here long to understand how important and powerful his influence has been on students, on the department, on the institution. And I see it front and center today. and I appreciate all of you participating in this wonderful event. So Scott, thank you for all that you have done. Congratulations on more achievements than we can count, and enjoy this day and be proud of all of you have achieved and all that you have enabled in the careers and futures of countless others. Thank you again, Scott. Congratulations. Thank you all for being here, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Kevin. Dr. E. Scott Geller has dedicated immense energy to this university and community. He is an alumni distinguished professor with an impressive age index of 72 and over hundreds of publications and over 50 books. One of them is outside for all of you to take. It's on a parenting book. His contributions have earned him numerous awards, and his impact is so profound that recent awards have been named in his honor. It's challenging to encapsulate the full extent of Scott's scientific legacy, so I'm delighted that we have friends and VT alumni here to pay tribute to his work across the decades. If you're visiting, we're grateful to meet you and hear your stories about Scott. Thank you so much for being here. I invite you all to imagine what you were doing 56 years ago in 1969 when Scott joined Virginia Tech. That year was marked by significant events like the moon landing, Woodstock, and the Beatles at their peak. Many of us in this room were just a twinkle in our mother's eye. Back then, the psychology department was a small unit with about 8 faculty members, many of whom studied animal behavior, a hot topic at that time. One of the very many impressive things about Scott that I really appreciate is that despite any pressure to conform to his early colleagues or others along the way, he has consistently been driven to make a difference in his own and very powerful way. The titles of his early papers demonstrate his vision for helping humanity in our community, even as a young assistant professor. I'm going to read some of those for you. 1972, a training program in behavior modification, design, outcome, and implementation. 1973, also quite important behavioral paper, but in the area of pollution, prompting consumer behaviors for pollution control. And then 1980, seatbelt usage, a potential target for applied behavior analysis. I want everybody to think back to those of us that were alive at that time. I was 4. Think back to the 80s, what it was like to ride around in a car. I don't remember having a seatbelt. I was sort of like, bouncing around in the car. And you are a huge reason that we are safer today. And thank you, Scott. Let's just give you a applause for that. We're going to hear a lot about those amazing discoveries and really influential work across the entire day. Over hundreds of papers later, and now holding scholarly distinctions in the fields of environmental psychology and the psychology of safety, among many other awards, Scott has realized his vision in many numerous ways. As a colleague noted on the Kudo board, which everybody should take a look at, and there's a QR code for that, it's pretty cool. The colleague said, "How does it feel to have saved so many lives?" How does it feel, Scott? Let that sink in, right? That's amazing. That's an amazing legacy. Let that sink in. This year, we celebrated the 20th anniversary of Virginia Tech Principles of Community, our commitment to uphold our motto of Ut Prosim, that I may serve. Dr. Geller has lived, breathed, and ignited Ut Prosim through his science and his commitment to education. He has witnessed the psychology department evolve from a focus on animal behavior to incredibly impactful work serving our community, and he has been a major driver of that evolution. I will end on a note of gratitude, a practice I learned from Scott that we should all engage in more, not only for others, but for our broad community well-being. Dr. Geller recently wrote about the power of this practice. Giving recognition or showing appreciation enhances one's state of gratefulness and therefore his or her subjective well-being. For example, research has demonstrated one powerful way to increase personal gratitude and well-being is to write a thank you letter to a benefactor and then read it to that individual. So Scott, consider today to be the receipt of over 100 thank you letters written just for you. These are easy to write, and I'm sure everyone in the room feels that way, and I am personally so grateful. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce our Master of Ceremonies, Dr. Krista Geller. She's the Safety Director at Kaiwit Construction and President of AC4P, Incorporated, with a PhD in Human Development from Virginia Tech. Krista is a passionate leader dedicated to creating safer, more caring communities, a mission she profoundly shares with her father, our guest of honor today. We are so grateful to have her guiding us through this special day. Krista, please join me up front to kick off the program.
Well, thank you. I kind of have to kick this off by saying, when Jamie said seatbelt, I'm pretty sure Dad was saying in his head, it's safety belt. I know. And as long as no one says accident, I think we're safe, right? As long as we steer clear of accident, we stick to injury and a safety belt, we'll get along quite well. Every time I've been given the privilege to introduce Dr. Geller, it's always been my goal not to kind of pour over all the things he's done, but make him incredibly nervous that I'm the one behind the mic. And I have a really high memory. I can say just about anything while up here. So I'm going to keep it easy. I'm going to keep it light because we do have to keep this to a couple of minutes. And I, for one, know I'm a chatty Cathy. I'm sitting next to 3 incredible chatty Cathys over here in the corner. And so we do have to keep it light. And every time I've gotten on the stage, and you all know this, Dad would say, you've got a couple of minutes. Don't say a lot about me. So I guess when I think about my dad, I mean, who else in the world puts both his daughters at risk to write a research article? Scott Geller, right? And I kind of, while sitting here, and because my sister's in the audience, I have to throw a little shade at him with the photo we have out front of the 3 of us with a pile of cigarettes in front of us. So I think that's my best introductory story to give right now, because Carly and I was a whopping 14. I didn't look a day over 12. And then we have Carly, who looks like she's running a mafia chain out there in the front. I look like a Smurf, and he's going to send us in to buy cigarettes. We had one 18-year-old. So we went into the store. Let's not forget we are wired for sound, okay? So back then there were no cell phones, right? There was nothing fun. There was a copy machine and a hand tape recorder in my pocket. So we were wired for sound. We would go in and we would buy the cigarettes. Now at that time, we had an individual in the cabs department that smoked one particular kind of cigarette. So it was Vantage Light or something. We would get it mixed up often and ask for the Vintage Light, and they would give us a little frown and say, it's Vantage. And they'd give us the cigarettes, no problems. So then we started having fun. There's Harley Davidsons, there's Lucky Strikes. We were coming home with a bunch of different cigarettes. And we were doing great until that article hit, the sting in Blacksburg. Now, I want you all to remember, I was in high school. I even took an auto mechanics class. What do you think everybody did in auto mechanics? We smoked cigarettes and we dipped. So that article shut down any underage buying of tobacco products. It was gone, done. Harley can probably attest to the fact that we lost many friends that year. So he said, I want to know the reaction of everybody in the stores. I want to know what this article is doing. So go back out. You don't have a reputation to save. Go back out. Go buy some more cigarettes. Okay. So we go back out, and I went to a Wade's. It's no longer a Wade's. And I remember going in, and that glorious photo out front is hanging sheet size from the window, and it says, do not sell to these girls. And I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to do it. So I let my cigarettes ride the conveyor belt. And I remember I'm kind of in the back. I mean, I was hidden a little bit, and she leans over and she looks at me and she goes, oh, hell no. And I learned words that day. And I said, I've audio taped you. And I went running out the store. And I said, Dad, I'm done. But needless to say, I was not done. I was 14 and I've continued doing research for you. Woo! Can we count the years? It's also when you walk a safety conference, because I'm in safety, when you walk a safety conference next to somebody, and I always say, I'm not walking behind you, Dad, I'm walking next to you, because he writes the articles and he comes up with the theories, and I tell him how they don't work on a job site. And that's our relationship. Let me tell you how this doesn't work. So it's been a real honor and privilege to learn from him and learn that, you don't say accident and you don't say seatbelt. So my bag of knowledge is very filled, and I'm very appreciative to be here today. And so without further ado, please step forward and give us your Master of Ceremonies, sir.
Oh, yeah. Wow. What can I say? I mean, I am overwhelmed, overwhelmed with gratitude. And I say, my department didn't put this on. This is university. This is Virginia Tech. And wow, I mean, and then to see some of you come back, I could, wow, after so many years, I'm blown away. And that's all I can say. I'm blown away by all of this. And I also want to introduce James O'Connor sitting right there in the front. Reason I may mention him is he created a song, an Actively Caring for People song. And I hope you get a chance to come to the ranch later for the dinner and hear. He taught our band how to play this song. And I heard it on the DVD, but it really hasn't gotten disseminated like it should be. But hearing it live, it's a whole different picture. So I just had to say, James, thanks for being here, man. I mean, by the way, I'm glad you said it that way, because you know what? This isn't about me. This is about all of you, man. This is about the students for 50 years that we did stuff and we did things different. We call ourselves behavior scientists. I mean, we study behavior. We don't do questionnaires. We don't do statistical gymnastics. We observe behavior in the community, in organizations, and then we attempt to intervene to improve that behavior. And I need to just say something about our department chair. And I'm not just, she is the best we've had. She's a leader. And she is the only department head, chair, whatever you call them, who came to one of our class meetings to understand what we're all doing. In 50 years, no department head has ever come to one of our sessions, but she did. And the dean, Dean Pitts, he was the first dean that I ever saw at a graduation ceremony. And I think it was his first year. He was at our graduation ceremony. I said, that's our dean. Anyway, that's involvement. That's getting people. It's us, getting us working together. So that's what I want to say. Thank you, Kevin, man. I mean, it's working together. It's people. And we have a society now, as you know, that's very self-serving with their cell phones. I call it their Skinner box, and some of you wouldn't understand. Pushing buttons. I mean, soon certain positive consequences. And that's what we see. Talk about danger. They walk across the street. And of course, we have today on our campus, it's dangerous. Bicycles, skateboards, all on the same place across campus. Let me make a statement about it. We need to change that. Talk about safety. But the bottom line is, we're a different culture. And the challenge is to get more collaboration. One more thing. Some of my faculty are here today. Thank you. Because I'm telling you, our current faculty, 50 years, they didn't know what we were doing. We operate in separate silos doing our research, and we do not no, we don't collaborate. We have a conference called the Dennis Dean Conference where students present their posters. And it was last Friday. And I went to that conference and I saw a poster, a faculty member. I have not met her. I'm embarrassed to tell you, a new faculty member that I have not met. And that undergraduate was doing research exactly similar that we are doing, except she was studying with a survey. We are studying gratitude through behavior, as you're going to hear in a minute. But the bottom line is, we're not communicating, man. But it's always kind of been that way. We can learn from each other. DEI, diversity, means different opinions and ideas coming together to create synergy. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts, but we have to get those parts working together. And I think our current department leader is doing more than I've seen in my 50 years. So I'm going to not go on much further, but I want to talk about what's going to happen in a moment. I'm proud to say that our researchers, and we've had for 50 years, we've had about 50 to 70 undergraduate students doing research and going to conferences and presenting papers. When I was an undergraduate, I never had that opportunity. Well, let me just make that point. I did go to the College of Worcester. And at the College of Worcester, and my colleague, Doug, is here. Where are you, Doug? Yeah, we went to Worcester together. And at Worcester, you had to do a thesis your junior and senior year, meaning you had to do research, report it to a committee, and present it. And I wanted our undergraduates to have that experience at Virginia Tech. I got a few more. The title of my talk is Lucky to Be Here. Let's talk about luck, or I actually think it's divine intervention. How did I get here? From Worcester, I thought I was going to be a doctor like my dad. My dad was a medical doctor. My mother was a nurse. So I thought I was going to go into the medical field, but I didn't take a physics course. So I was concerned about taking the MedCat exams. And my advisor at Worcester got a phone call from a professor at SIU, Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. And he said, hey, do you have any students who could do, seniors graduating, who can do research in applied experimental psychology? That's how I got into SIU in Carbondale. And I worked in cognitive psychology. My thesis and my dissertation was cognitive psychology. I was studying cognitions by measuring reaction time. And then it came to graduating, 1969. Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? I never thought for a moment that I would be a college professor. You kidding me? Doing research? I never saw it. But again, my advisor, same advisor from Worcester, got a phone call and said, from Virginia Tech. Actually, he met my advisor at a conference. And it turned out that William Pavlik was our first department head, and I was hired. There's 6 of us hired, and we doubled the size of the Department of Psychology in 1969. Psychology was nothing at Virginia Tech. Nothing. I mean, this is an engineering school. Who needs psychology? And in fact, introductory psychology, one class of 50 students a semester is what we had. But the bottom line is, he said, do you have anybody who could teach human classes? Because Bill Pavlik wanted an animal physiology department. We had a rat lab, we had pigeons, we had animal physiology, and he was in a jam. He needed somebody to teach human class. Who's going to teach social psych? Who's going to teach abnormal psych? And my advisor from Worcester said, I got the man for you. I came and interviewed in 1969. I did not give a job talk. Talk about luck or divine. I did not give a job talk. I just interviewed and they hired me. That never happens, but it happened to me. And I'm here. And while I was here, by the way, I did cognitive psychology, of course. And that department head, William Pavlik, he had a sign behind his desk, big sign that said, publish or perish. And by the way, I knew nothing about college professor. I didn't know the difference between an assistant professor and associate. I completely new to me. I just knew I wanted to teach. But anyway, I did research, built labs. By the way, he said, you want to publish, you got to publish in JEP, Journal of Experimental Psychology. That's what I did. And I went up for tenure, had 60 publications, and had a teaching award. And my department, by the way, our department had untenured faculty on that committee to decide whether I should go on and be tenured. Half said yes, half said no. And the department chair broke the tie and sent me to the college department. They turned me down. Folks, they turned down my tenure. They rejected my tenure. I would not be here if I didn't go to the provost, Les Malpas, a degree in psychology. And I walked in the door and he said, Scott, what's the matter? What's the matter with your department? What's the matter with you? What's going on? And I explained to him the competitive nature, the competition going on. If it wasn't for that conversation, I wouldn't be here. And that's why it's lucky. A phone call from Worcester to get me. I mean, I'm really, it's divine intervention. I thank you. And interestingly enough, I also said one day, cognitive psychology, this is not to slam cognitive psychology, but for me, the work I was doing was not making a difference. And all my life, I wanted our work to make a difference. And that's why I switched. When I was in SIU, I happened to go, I'm going more than I should, aren't I? I'll finish and I'll stop. I visited Anna State Hospital. Some of you might know Anna State Hospital. I talked to Ted Ione and Ted Ione and Nate Azrin, and they were the heroes in behavioral psychology. And they taught me, I took a course from Ted Ione on behavior modification. That's what they called it in those days. And that was in the back of my head. So after all this cognitive stuff, I said, to make a difference, we have to change behavior in the community. So as you're going to hear in a moment, briefer than I just talk, and I apologize, it went on too long, but when we started in 1970, we addressed problems that were timely at the time. So you're going to hear about litter control. And then we went into safety belt promotion because that became a big deal. And then alcohol was a problem. So my point is, this is not about me. This is about the students over the years who went out and did this research and gave presentations at conferences about behavior change to make the world a better place. Thank you.
All right, so what we'll do now is I'll give a brief introduction to each speaker that's going to come up here. Elise, did you bring your PowerPoint? Just kidding. I would like to say the fun part about my role is I literally have worked with everybody on this sheet of paper. So I'm going to keep my jokes limited, but I will have several just to throw people under the bus because I think we need to today because it's your day and you would do the same. So I do want to bring up Dr. Elise Drake, and, I can't throw Elise under the bus because Elise is an amazing human being. But, when you set up here earlier, you saved lives. The motivation that you instilled in so many people, the things that you are doing today are incredible. So I'm going to read her title, but she's going to come up here and show you all the amazing things she's done. She was the behavioral prompter for litter control. She is now the senior educator at the CAMC Institute for Academic Medicine. And we had a long conversation, everything she's doing, and she's just making waves and making changes. And so, Elise, come on up here.
I get to be the one to follow Scott Geller. No pressure at all with that. I know we've already mentioned gratitude a couple of times this afternoon, but I do want to, start by saying that I have an endless amount of gratitude, not only for Scott, but just my time here at Virginia Tech and my time in CABS. It's been, as with many of us in here, it's been extremely influential, not only on my career and things I've done since then, but just my personal life in general. And I did work closely on many research projects in my time in CABS as a PhD student. A lot of them were our alcohol projects, most of which were grant funded. But what I'm going to talk about for a few minutes this afternoon is my dissertation research, which Dr. Geller has already alluded to. And my dissertation research was, it was a project that was aimed at intervening and improving environmentally responsible behaviors. And it examined the use of positive versus negative antecedent messages to reduce littering behavior. But it was based very specifically on a methodology that Dr. Geller and his colleagues had used in the 70s. It was actually a few different studies that were kind of combined together. It relied on the ABC model of behavior impact, which most of you are familiar with in here, the antecedent behavior consequence model. And with that, an antecedent message can kind of prompt the availability or opportunity of a consequence that will follow if a behavior is engaged in. And there are lots and lots of environmentally responsible behavior research that have used that ABC model of consequence. Interestingly, though, most of those interventions and those research kind of peaked in the 70s when Dr. Geller was doing that important research, and in the 80s started to decline and have only since declined since then. But my dissertation project in particular examined the impact of these anti-litter messages on actual behaviors. So we weren't relying on self-report, which is what most of the research was doing at that time. We looked at behaviors, and I used a hand-build distribution methodology, the exact same one pretty much that Dr. Geller and colleagues had used almost 36 years prior to my research in 2009. And the specific aim of my research was to look at a variety of different anti-litter messages as prompts. And I also looked at gender effects as he did in the 1970s. So the methodology that Dr. Geller had used in 1976 with Dr. Winnett and Orbaugh was that they were in 2 grocery stores in Blacksburg. They had undergraduate research assistants out there handing out handbills that were specials of the week for those grocery stores. And in the baseline condition, there were no messages at all. And then after that, in the intervention or the message period condition, there were a variety of anti-litter messages that were, on these handbills. At that point, Dr. Geller had looked at general versus specific messages, and then also kind of positive framed or negative framed, gain or loss frame messages, and had also looked at gender, color, receptacles, things like that. So there had also been an intervention period where they looked at the specific messages that were distributed. And then these undergraduate research assistants also kind of collected all the handbills after and looked at the percentage of littering that was done with these handbills. And in 1976, Dr. Geller found that when the messages were added to these handbills, littering was reduced by more than 50%. And he used different messages than I ended up using, but at that time, they also found that a specific message that encouraged recycling yielded the largest reduction in littering behaviors. So I used almost the identical methodology. We were at 2 of the different Kroger locations here, had about 56 undergraduate research assistants that were handing out handbills that had specials of the week on the front and then different anti-litter messages on the back. I was looking more specifically at positive versus negative. So we used 3 different positive framed or gained framed messages on some of the handbills and 3 different negative framed on other ones. We had done a focus study with a bunch of students to determine which would be the most impactful. One slight deviation from Dr. Geller's research is those messages had been a bit more vague and didn't alert to specific consequences that could occur, whereas the 6 messages we used did kind of alert to consequences, either positive or negative. So we did the same distribution in similar locations. We had the handbills collected at the end. Interestingly, although my dissertation did find a statistically significant reduction in littering behaviors when the messages were used, it was 9% less impactful than Dr. Geller's research in 1976. So they'd actually found less littering going on with those messages at that time than when I did it. Dr. Geller's research, they didn't find any gender disparities. My research actually found during the baseline condition and the message condition that women were littering at statistically significantly higher rates than men. And we found that in both conditions. What was very striking about that is that almost all of the research, at least up to that point in 2009 for my dissertation, had shown differently that, there was either no difference between genders or that women were, engaging in environmentally responsible behaviors at higher rates than men. Almost all of that research was based on self-report. Very few studies were looking at actual behaviors like Dr. Geller's had and like mine that followed his had done. But we did both find these reductions when the messages were used, which suggested, I think, for both studies that strategies, he also found that the positive and negative frame messages work just as effectively as I did in my dissertation. There was not a difference between positively framed messages and negatively framed messages, which would indicate that many campaigns that want to make large-scale behavior change should use elements of both positive and negative messages. So that was my research that really kind of almost duplicated a lot of what Dr. Geller had done almost 36 years prior. As Krista had mentioned, I am now working in healthcare. So I actually work for a healthcare organization that has several hospital sites. My title is senior educator. I actually wear a whole bunch of hats, and it gets complicated when I explain what I do for my job. But a large portion of it is designing curriculum, teaching, training, and coaching in this medical and hospital setting. So I am no longer, I think, specifically involved in or engaged in promoting a lot of environmentally responsible behavior. However, I really, in my roles of teaching and training and coaching, I've really used a ton of tenets from my dissertation research, from message framing, from the ABC model, and from my time at CABS and working with Dr. Geller. Lots of initiatives that I work on, I've used things that I learned specifically from him in my time in CABS and my dissertation, things like improving patient compliance, increasing preventative health behaviors in patients, improving hand hygiene of all staff across all of our hospitals, using very standardized and strategic communication and language in the OR and other procedural units. And perhaps most importantly for me is also teaching really the most effective ways that the attendings that are overseeing our resident physicians and medical students, the most effective ways to teach and train and educate these physicians that, are about to be doctors and have become doctors. So I feel like that work has been very impactful, even though I'm no longer focusing on environmentally responsible behaviors. So kind of more broadly, not only in my work and my career and what I'm doing now, but also in some pro bono work that I do with a small nonprofit foundation that is kind of work that's much closer to my heart. But in both of those areas, what I learned in my time, with Dr. Geller and my time in CABS in general has been absolutely invaluable. I learned from Dr. Geller, from his teaching and also all the behaviors that he modeled, that it's absolutely crucial to think outside of the box. And that coming up with really creative problem solving and solutions can have really extremely impactful and meaningful outcomes. And also that if there's drive and a sense of purpose, there's always a way. So I am forever grateful for you and my time in CABS and the impact that it's had since then. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Elise. I think when I think about that, I think about the size of my trash can versus the size of my recycle bin. You know, if we want to think of cognitive messages, give me a bigger recycling bin. How many of you have your recycling bin filled after 3 days in my trash bin? Yeah. And then sometimes when I see it all go off in the same truck, I wonder. So just so for the next speaker, Dr. Phil Lehman, he's the Chief Residential PTSD and Substance Use Disorder Treatment Programs, Veteran Affairs in this system. And I have to kind of say, he rented a house across the street from us. And I'm just, you know, some of the people Dad put around us, I'm just wondering if there was a strategic plan there for monitoring our behavior and things like that, because we've had quite a few live and breathe. So Phil, come on up here.
Oh, man. Where to start? Where to start? I guess I'll start with saying, Scott, you told me not to talk about you because this is really about your students. And since I'm one of your students, I'm going to do what I want, which is talk about you. I think that all makes sense. And the other thing is, I'm going to talk a lot about teaching and what a great teacher Scott is. And it's really embarrassing to actually have to read my comments rather than deliver them extemporaneously like the three of you have. However, you know, where do you start in 56 years, right? I mean, you got to, and how in the hell am I going to memorize all this stuff? This is 56 years worth of comments. So I'm going to be reading it, and we call that the door in the face technique. And I still am going to read it, and I still did not memorize it though. Okay, here we go. Let's get started. The book. In the summer of 2006, my last year at Virginia Tech as a graduate student, I had the honor of working with Dr. Geller on a book that we titled Teaching Excellence in a Research-Centered University: Energy, Empathy, and Engagement in the Classroom. Our model was straightforward enough. We invited members of the VT's Academy of Teaching Excellence to contribute chapters detailing their teaching philosophy, how they bring that philosophy to life, and giving some tips for teaching to new faculty. We ended up with 39 contributions, representing a wide range of university disciplines, departments, and colleges. And although Dr. Geller did pretty much all of the editing, my role was very important. I played the critical role of mediator and negotiator, explaining to the distinguished English professor why his essay was bathed in red editing ink and why those edits actually made it better, which they usually did. The essays and contributors revealed outstanding teaching was often possible in really large classrooms. Several of them taught class sections that were larger than 500 students and were considered the very best teachers at Virginia Tech. Three factors emerged from the content analysis of the essays. Energy, empathy, and engagement were identified as the most critical for outstanding teaching. A backstory. In 2000, after 11 years of working in the admissions office of my alma mater, Eastern Mennonite University, I was considering a career change. I was, this admissions counselor, I was an admissions officer, and I did a pretty good job with it, but it didn't feel like the kind of career I'd want to have for the rest of my life. To me, being a college professor was like one of the coolest things you could ever be. And if you're going to be a college professor, what better to teach than psychology, a discipline that's relevant for almost anything that you have to do in life. Here's the catch, though. If you're going to do that, you need to go to graduate school. So I headed to Virginia Tech to interview in the psychological sciences program. After long days of interviews with professors in the psychological science program at Virginia Tech, I was feeling rattled and insecure. These professors were looking for research machines, and I wasn't one of those. They wanted folks who were focused on research and had some research experience. My lack of experience and my special interest in teaching, maybe at a small liberal arts university, was definitely not a feather in my cap when it came to being admitted to a PhD program. At the very end of the day, Dr. Helen Crawford informed me that she was able to come through with my request to meet with Dr. Scott Geller from the clinical department. I wasn't at all interested in becoming a clinical psychologist, so there's no way that I was going to work with this guy. But I was really interested in meeting him because I heard about him from one of my undergraduate professors, Galen Lehman. His hair was gray. He was a little less than twice my age at the time, but his energy and enthusiasm made him look maybe about 20. He listened to me and he seemed genuinely excited about my interest in environmental psychology and delighted to share how his work matched my interests. He explained his goal of making a real world impact by applying behavioral principles on a large scale. The targets were diverse: safety belts, industrial safety, fighting dehydration in developing countries, intervening to reduce risky drinking of college students. His concept of actively caring, putting values into behavioral action, really resonated with me. As he spoke of his research, he occasionally jumped to his feet, darted over to a shelf or darted over to a drawer, pulled out copies of research articles, pulled out books, and in one case pulled out like this giant 10 cassette speaking series that he had about industrial safety. For the younger folks in here, those cassettes, it's like they put audio files on 2 spools, magnetic tape, and then I think most people here know what that is. So after 30 minutes of talking, my lap was full and I'd shifted from feeling deflated to energized. A large scale impact: 41, 1,800, 90,000. 41 students received their PhDs under the mentorship of Dr. Geller. And you've already heard from one, and you'll hear from a handful of them today. As a mentor, a model, and a friend, Dr. Geller exemplified teaching excellence in myriad ways. I'm grateful for the empathy that he showed me when I was anxious, overwhelmed, and experiencing my first ever panic attacks in my first year at VT. Thanks, clinical programming, Dr. Klum's back there, for being able to help me identify what was going on. He listened reflectively, he validated, he encouraged me, but he stayed away from persuasion. That's exactly what I needed in that moment. And I think if I hadn't have gotten it, I don't think I would have stayed. Maybe he did belong in the clinical program after all. Dr. Geller modeled prolific scholarship to his graduate students, and I don't think any of us ever measured up to that. One thing we could count on was his prompt feedback, no matter what. No matter the length of the papers, almost without fail, the next day, he'd get it back. He'd hand it back, and the margins and the spaces between the lines were filled with his stylistically refined handwriting, slashing, sometimes reconstructing sentences. When I ham-handedly explained some construct or some design, I could almost feel the frustration in those comments coming through like, but by the time I got through the constructive and sometimes difficult feedback, I could always count on a statement of encouragement at the end and next steps to prepare this manuscript for publication. 1,800. This is a conservative estimate of the number of students who came through the Center for Applied Behavior Systems. Don't call it a lab. That's almost as bad as saying seatbelt, right? Or accidents. Since 1987. There's no telling how many posters and papers emerged from the center, but I'm certain there were thousands. It's an outstanding example of how a large research university can provide individual attention and personalized teaching opportunities for its students. CABS is a synergistic center benefiting its leaders and multiple undergraduates involved. The undergraduates provided and provide the workforce needed to complete the large applied research grants, the kind that Elise talked about, and his graduate students were working on. And in exchange, the undergrads received training in research, training in writing, scholarship to begin their CVs, and strong letters of recommendation for their graduate studies. 90,000. 90,000 is the number of students who passed through introductory psychology in the 56 years that Scott Geller taught it. During my years at VT, I was fortunate enough to serve as introductory psychology coordinator, working with Dr. Geller and other lecturers. And now at least Kurt Hoffman is here. I don't see Dr. Harrison necessarily, but working with those professors, and then also working with the graduate students who are teaching the smaller recitation sections. Dr. Geller's ability to consistently engage a classroom of over 600 students really astounded me, and I attended whenever I could. He was one of the last holdouts of the overhead projector. Most of you know that. And he made great use of those, darting back and forth between the two, putting up a cartoon on one end that would summarize the concept in a comedic and meaningful way while teeing up the next concept about behavioral or social psychology. He made behavioral and social psychology come to life for his students, illustrating the concepts and their relevance and the possibilities for them with vivid examples, the synergy of the drum roll, and he actually brought a snare drum to class for that. The cookie poem, the platinum rule, and my favorite, the opportunity clock. You don't set an alarm clock in the morning, you set an opportunity clock. Guys, an alarm clock is like sometimes a circular thing that we used to put, now you do it on. Actually, it's a relatively older crowd in here. Most people probably know. I laugh at that, but it illustrates the power of positive psychology, the power of a reframe, right? And it's something that I've used in my clinical career ever since. And I'm sure that the concepts that you brought to life for those students stuck with them many years after the class, and they certainly have stuck with me. Thank you, Scott, for the energy, the empathy, and the engagement that you showed in your 56 years of service at Virginia Tech. I don't think there's any scientific way to show the impact that you've made, but I'm pretty certain if we could somehow go back to 1969 and It's a Wonderful Lifestyle, pluck Scott out of Virginia Tech, that Virginia Tech and maybe the world would be a much dingier and less vibrant place. Thank you, Scott.
You know, Phil, you bring up a couple things, you know, the energy and stuff he had across the stage. I'm not sure if people realize that he has walked off it before in the middle of class with such vibrance and excitement. And I think the other thing we can't overlook is those of us that have had our papers edited by Dr. Geller. It is very positive, you know, he passes it over and says, it's good, it's good. They're just suggestions. They're just suggestions. Can you read it? Can you just call me? And so, yeah, I'm right there with you. So the next two speakers, one has been in my life for a long time. In fact, Steve would drive me to and from at the Coca-Cola plant when we would do the Coca-Cola research. So long history there, and especially with alcohol. So, oh yeah. Yeah, 4 a.m, meeting at Daring Hall with your little chili bandana on, ready to drive us up to Roanoke. Yep, chili bandana. And then you always had something canned or jarred. Take it, guys, take it. Something would be jarred in the center. You will have jarred something for us to take home as we met at 3 o'clock in the morning. No, I remember it all. So, Steve, please come up, and Ryan, Dr. Ryan Smith. Is he speaking too?
It'll come up.
Okay, you're going first. Okay.
I'll hand off after a minute or so. So Phil stole some of my thunder because I was going to talk about some of the things that he talked about. But my primary area of research was alcohol abuse prevention. Why would I be interested in this? Well, first I have to give a shout out to a colleague that we lost 6 years ago, Kent Glindeman. And he was a substantial part of that research, and kind of got me interested in that. And we did enjoy a beverage, sometimes more than one. So I was interested, hey, alcohol and substance abuse. And we went everywhere to get data. I went to over 100 fraternity parties to collect data. Yeah. So we would meet at 11 o'clock at night with our team, our commando teams, I used to call them. I don't know if that's really what they were, but we'd have 8 to 12 people, and we would get our stuff together, and we had 4 milk cart crates, and we had 24 blood alcohol level machines, and we would go out the door and we would show up, and we would collect all our data in like 60 minutes. And it was furious, fast and furious. And it was kind of fun. And so I went to lots of parties, but I didn't get to drink at them. And then we used to do Thursday nights, or was it Wednesday night? It was Wednesday? Thursday nights, some places, but Thursday night was a big drinking night downtown. So we'd go downtown and we would collect data, all kinds of different things. I can't remember. I mean, we almost every Thursday night. And then my dissertation was on 21st birthday drinking. And I followed 600 students from 3 months before to 3 months after their 21st birthday and studied what went on, like leading up to and during. And we were downtown on Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights to collect their blood alcohol levels of those people who had come downtown who were 21st birthday drinking. We did have to stop that part of the research after about 2 to 3 weeks because there were some that were so intoxicated that I could not follow my human subjects protocol because there's no way I couldn't intervene and call for assistance. So we stopped. So unfortunately, that part of the research, but it was an interesting time. And then we did tailgating at Virginia Tech football games, and would go out before the games and visit tailgates and all kinds of crazy stuff. I don't know what I was thinking. But this did all lead to something wonderful, which was I ended up getting a job here at Virginia Tech running and setting up the alcohol abuse prevention program, which I ran for, I don't know, 17 years. And it was because of that experience and because of the training that I had and the research that we brought in and the connections that we had in that lab that really made that program such a great success. And I really appreciated that. Although I don't use that, do I use my PhD anymore? I don't know. But I'm a 7th grade science teacher. So I left Virginia Tech. I was lured to the coast and ended up in Savannah at the STEM Academy at Bartlett, which is a school for gifted kids. And I teach 7th grade science. Yes, I love 7th graders, believe it or not. They need a steady hand, as you might know if you've ever had a 7th grader. But I take much of what I learned and much of what I did. And I say, Scott, I mean, I would never be the writer I am today. I was a horrible writer. I got so many red pages. They weren't suggestions. He said that. But he would point out the one thing. Why didn't you change this? Didn't I change that last time? But it was good. You learned, you could take, I don't know. What I used to write, it would take me 3 paragraphs. I could write in 1 paragraph, succinctly. And he had some words that he didn't like. What were some of the words? I can't remember. Utilize. Efficacy. So the first thing you did before you after you learned this right away, you just crossed out all those words. Just edit them all out before you give Scott your paper because they're not staying. Unnecessary words. But the number of people that you impacted and the impact that you had on their lives and we literally trained so many students on how to do science. And not just go out and be the data collectors, to be my lackey, to do the hard work. But those who did that and showed up consistently would learn all kinds of things. How to do statistics, how to make a proper table, how to make a proper chart, how to put together a presentation, how to stand in front of your peers and talk, how to create a professional presentation. And so many of those people, I don't know how many, but so many of those people went on to get degrees, to get PhDs, to get master's degrees. I don't know, we must have sent 10, 12 a year, at least. I don't know. I have no estimate of that. You have an estimate that you're gonna pull out of your,
What, graduate students?
yeah, how many people we send to graduate school through that? Lots and lots. And so we really appreciate that. I'm gonna bring up, Ryan, who, was a part of much of that research, and so he might have some more things to add.
Good afternoon. As Steve just said, I'm Ryan Smith. I graduated under Dr. Geller with a PhD in 2013, and it is such a privilege to be here, and I'm overwhelmed because not only am I talking about 20 years of research and $1 million of grant funding and trying to condense that into 5 minutes, but Dr. Geller, as you've heard from so many people, has been one of the most, if not the most influential people in all of our lives. And so to stand right beside him and talk about all the work is humbling and difficult, but it really is a privilege to be able to talk about some of that today. So I want to go and begin with what got me into cabs, because Steve gave a really great introduction to the alcohol work that we've been doing, the methodology we were going with breath alcohol testers, the fraternity parties, private parties, tailgates, you name it, where people are drinking, we send teams there. But it gives me a chance, since he talked about that, to talk big picture about impact and legacy, specifically with some of the alcohol work and what we did. Because not only did the research help save lives, but also the number of students that were impacted, as well as the people that were participating and how they were impacted. I'll get a chance to talk about that briefly. So my journey in cabs is where I wanted to start, and it was actually with Phil. And I'm so glad that Phil was up here talking, even though I hate presenting after Phil because he's one of the most authentic educators that I've ever met in my entire life, and just a genuinely amazing person and presenter. But I was a young student. I was, 18, second week of school as a freshman at Virginia Tech. I was in the 600-person introductory psychology class. And everybody tells you after class, talk to your teacher, find ways you can get involved. And I did. So I waited till everybody was done, and I walked to the front of the room and I talked to the professor and I said, I'm really excited. I want to do research. This Virginia Tech is my dream to be here. I just switched from engineering to psychology. I want to get involved in research. And they said, well, thank you, but I take juniors and seniors. And if you take my class and you kind of prove your worth, then I'll consider taking you. Which is fine. I mean, that's a valid approach. And I know, professors, you've got to be very strategic with your time. But Phil was the TA at the time, and he overheard that interaction. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, Ryan, I know that was probably a little bit difficult, but I know somebody who will believe in you and give you a chance to do research. And Dr. Geller talked about divine intervention earlier. The second week of school, I went to my first CABS meeting and found out that they do alcohol research, which I had no clue about. And what Phil and Cabs didn't know is I lost one of my best friends to a drunk driver when I was in elementary school. And after that, I attended the MAD National Youth Summit in 2000. And I met a person there whose mom had been paralyzed by a drunk driver. And through that experience, and she's telling me in tears about what that means in her life, I said, I promise you, I will do everything in my power to make sure that doesn't happen to anybody else again. And here I am, 2 weeks into Virginia Tech, with a professor who's an alumni distinguished professor, with an entire team and decades of experience doing alcohol research, and I'm walking into it. So that's a piece of the impact that I wanted to talk about, is just how much somebody believing in students, what a difference that can make when it's, the tens of thousands that Phil was talking about, or the people that I'm going to talk about directly related to the alcohol program. So just for the graduate time that I was there, I ended up also doing my master's PhD at Virginia Tech. I calculated that we had 600 students that we trained in the alcohol methodology. And I'm not calling them data collectors, because if you wanted to participate in the alcohol project due to the sensitivities, you not only had to go through a pre-training, go through cabs, but every single night you did data collection. You also had an additional hour of training to make sure you knew the protocols, the risks, and how to handle everything to make sure that IRB would get that through. So these 600 people, they got it by the time that they left. During my years in graduate school, we had over 100 conference presentations. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but 100 conference presentations that were all student-led at international and national conferences: American Psychological Association, Association for Psychological Sciences, Association of Behavior Analysis International, Virginia Psychological Association. I could keep going. Over 100 people that generated 400 authorships for students that then were able to go and basically have their ticket punched to go into graduate programs and the places they wanted to go. And I can tell you the graduates and cabs that worked on what we call the alcohol team, because it was a team of people that made this happen, all went on to do amazing, amazing things. So from that, I did want to point out that 93 different people were authors. So it's not just a few people that were doing a lot of work. 93 different students had that opportunity. And we calculated over 15,000 blood alcohol concentrations during those years I was in graduate school. Why I want to highlight that 15,000 number and the impact that we have, because I can go through every study and I'll give some highlights. Steve, and all the folks, Ken, Glindeman before that had worked so closely with our IRB to get permissions to do this work. Virginia Tech is the only place that is able to do this kind of work the way that they are, where you're in these high-risk settings, giving breath alcohol feedback. What's special about what they did in addition to that is usually if you're doing alcohol feedback, it's double blind. The researcher doesn't know the BAC of the person who's participating, the participant never knows. And why is that? It's because somebody asked a lawyer and there's legal liability and you don't know somebody's been drinking too much. And now what do you do, especially if you're watching them go to their car? So we worked through with NIAAA and a bunch of funding agencies on how to handle that, worked with IRB, and we were able to make a very important point, is that number is an education opportunity to save their life. And so even though there might be some risk associated with that, for this research, we had 15,000 times where we told somebody their BAC and what that meant for their level of risk and their level of impairment. I'm going to get back to that 15,000 number, but I want to put in one study result that we had from all of those data points. And this goes back to my dissertation in decreasing college alcohol consumption. We asked people, are you a designated driver? 60% of people that said they were a designated driver were drinking. Of those people that were drinking, over 60% had a BAC over 0.05, which is now the legal limit in Utah, and where we all know people are reasonably impaired. And 25% had a BAC over 0.08. Your designated driver has a BAC 25% over 0.08. And so we were curious, can we intervene on those people to help them better understand the risk in their BAC? So of those 25% over 0.08, we said, do you think that you're over or under 0.08? And about 40% of them felt that they were actually under 0.08. Now, the 60%, they knew that they were too impaired to drive and they were going to drive anyway, but there was 40% of people that didn't know. And those are the people, when you showed them that blood alcohol concentration, the tears and the emotion that I saw in those people. And I remember one woman distinctly saying, you may have just saved my life. I thought I was good to drive, and this completely changes everything for me. So during the time that we worked at CABS, we did a number of different ways of giving people feedback. Actually, Matt Howard's in the back and did a lot of work on that too. And I'll give a shout out to the folks in the back from the alcohol team in a second. But I just want you to understand, when you're giving 15,000 people that information, it had an impact and it mattered. So first impact, I want to talk about the students and just those hundreds of presentations that we had. We also have publications in Journal Safety Research, American Journal of College Health, Journal of Prevention and Intervention in the Community, Transportation Research Record, Addictive Behaviors. I can go on about that too. But the impact on the students and where they ended up going, the impact on the community by just doing the research. And then I wanted to highlight a couple of just kind of the fun studies that we did. When Steve was talking about all the different environments that we went to, we tried everything to get people to drink less. Everything. We looked at the environment. DOC and the funding paid for pizza to give people food before they ate. We helped get designated driver programs. The one thing that reduced drinking was paying people, essentially. We gave them, if you're under a certain BAC, you can be entered into a raffle to win a certain amount of money. And having that incentive actually was able to shift the BAC of drinkers that night at the party. So there's so many lessons that we had, the full amount of time I'd go into all the studies and all the impacts. But I just really wanted to highlight that. We have a couple of students in the back from the alcohol team. I just wanted them to raise their hand quickly. Matt Howard, Alex Melkonian, JP Plummer, just folks that are still here today, right? People that care enough we're now literally talking about generations of researchers that have been doing this, have all gone on to do major and really important things. And that's literally because of Dr. Geller. So what I wanted to end with is one of my favorite things to close on, just because of actively caring and Doc and what he meant to me, which is a Copernican moment. And usually if there's more time, I'd make people go through astronomy and guess who is Copernicus and what was he known for. But there's one big thing that he was given credit for, which is the heliocentric theory versus geocentric theory. So where am I going with this? Well, he was the first person that realized that everything didn't revolve around the Earth, but we actually all revolved around something greater, the sun. And what Dr. Geller has taught all of us, and what I think everybody in CABS get, is we're all working together to make something bigger happen for the world, to improve safety, to save lives, to make people's lives more enriched and full. And it's not about us. And all of our research and all the work is pointed towards that. And it's directly because of you, Dr. Geller. So I want to thank you for the time and the legacy and for inspiring me and so many other people to make a difference. Thank you.
I think too, it's important to remember alcohol research started in our barn at the top with pizza and a bunch of drunk students and testing the police games, you know, the ruler and standing on one foot. And there were certain students such as Ted Boyce who just got drunker and better at every single one of those. And then we brought in food. So I think for me, it hit me one day when I realized I was at a fraternity party taking data with my father. It's not cool, but it became cool. It was a normal thing. So this next speaker, man, Dr. Kelly England, I'm going to let her introduce herself, but I'm going to say a little something about her. Kelly England made me a child safety seat expert, absolute expert. I would go out, I would ride around with Coca-Cola drivers all day, come home, collect alcohol research at Sharky's till the wee end of the morning, and then meet Kelly at Walmart to do a safety seat check. And Brian Lee and I were your installers, and we would go in. You had the most amazing grant because we'd have people come through. I don't know if you remember the lady that sewed her safety belt together. And we're looking at these seats, and Kelly is like, oh my God. And we're running in there buying seats and putting brand new seats in there. So come on up, Kelly, and tell us about it.
Hi. So as Krista said, I'm Kelly and I graduated in 2002. I might have been one of your first clinical students. I might have been, I'm not sure, because I know we had both IO and clinical at the same time. So when I came in, I knew already a lot about Scott. I knew about the work that he had done because I'd previously worked with one of his other students, Brian Porter over here. And Brian was in the CABS lab, CABS center when he was an undergrad and had started his own group at ODU, and I had done my master's there. So I knew I came in wanting to make a difference, and I was just trying to figure out, like, you know, where do I fit in psychology? Well, before I came in, I took this, you know, child passenger safety course, and I worked with Brian on traffic safety. So I knew it was going to be traffic safety. And specifically, I was always interested in working with children and how can I apply what I want to do to children. And so when I came in, Scott was mainly working with adults, a lot of adult safety, a lot of work in the mines and working with truckers and a lot of things. He had dipped his toe into child safety before when people were trying to get folks to use child safety seats, but at the time wasn't doing a lot in it because people had started using safety seats. And so when I came in, it was focused on misuse. It was a giant problem. This was the late 90s, and 90% of parents were using the seats wrong. And if it's misused, it doesn't do the same in a crash. It doesn't secure the child properly. It just doesn't work. So this was what I wanted to focus on. And I naively, very, very naively thought, oh, this is a piece of cake. We just examine the antecedents and the consequences and really look at the behavior. So we got to work creating a critical behavior checklist, like all of the grad students do when they first come in there, observing the behavior and going out and doing some safety seat checks to check out how our critical behavior checklist is working. And we observed and collected data. And I really naively thought, oh, this is easy because parents, of course, are so motivated to keep their child safe. This isn't going to be it's not going to be a heavy lift to get folks to, you know, participate in what I want to do. So as we're planning this is what's in my head, that this is not going to be hard. And so we trained, speaking of lots of folks working on your dissertation or working on your project, there were 60 students from the Center for Applied Behavior Systems that I gave credit to in my dissertation, like acknowledgements. 60 had worked on my project because we were doing all sorts of things related to this. But one of the things that we needed to do was make sure we had plenty of people to check all those safety seats, because we were going to be totally like buried with people in line coming to have their seat checked because 90% of parents were doing it wrong. Well, it didn't work out that way. Steve made me this giant banner. Do you remember the giant banner that was, get your free child safety seat check today? We hung those at the entrances to all the Walmart parking, lot. We put signs in the windows, signs hanging from the ceiling. We were ready. We were all trained. And then we had an army of us there and nobody showed. We were just sitting there twiddling our thumbs, like wondering what's going on. And I remember just being so shocked because I was just sure that, gosh, well, I mean, maybe they just don't know that 90% of parents are doing it wrong. So then we started really, really saying to people, well, most parents do it wrong. And they still just, oh yeah, no, I'm good. Thank you. And most parents were thinking, yeah, but I'm the one doing it right. Or they were thinking, oh, it must not be that big of a deal. I mean, it's a car seat. I've got my child in a child safety seat, so I'm sure it's fine. So then in the true CABS way, we all started talking about it around this giant, conference table, as we do in the leader meetings and talking with Scott, what can I do? How can we change this? And so, he really started saying, you really got to look at the antecedents and change the way that you're prompting folks to show up. And so we really started talking about all of the risk communication literature. And he got one of those, again, reference to the cassettes. I remember getting this, it was a stack of VHSs, and it was Peter Sandman, and he talked about outrage and how do you get people outraged about something? How do you make them care about something when they don't care about it? And so Scott was telling me to look at all of these different researchers and I started burying myself learning about what Sandman was talking about. Now he was talking about how do you get people less outraged about things when you don't, that was one of the things he was like, how do you get people less outraged about something that you don't want them to do? Or how do you bring the outrage up? I was just interested, how do I get people to care about this so that I can collect my data? But then also looking at Weinstein and looking at Cialdini, looking at the influence book that you gave me. So really kind of diving into looking at all of that and understanding more about risk perception and risk communication and how do you get people to care about what you care about? Because that was really the thing I didn't see coming, was that. And it wasn't that they don't care. It's just they misperceived the risk. And so that was what I focused a lot of my work on, is trying to understand that while I was in the program. And that was one of the first papers that I wrote with Scott, was on how do you marry the ABC model and the risk communication together. So that was my time in CABS. I really didn't realize at the time that what I learned in CABS was really like key building blocks for everything I would do in my academic career after. I spend a lot of time, I direct a division at Eastern Virginia Medical School, which just merged with Old Dominion University. And I direct a division, we have 50 employees, and we focus on changing health behavior. We're very applied, we're community engaged. And so we, of course, work in vehicle safety, but we also work in substance use. We work in vaping prevention and sexual transmitted disease and prevention. Like if it's a health behavior that's causing problems, we're focusing on it. We have a faculty member and a team working on it. And every one of those health behaviors, we apply the model. We're looking at the ABCs of the behavior. We're observing. We're also looking at how do you change the perception of risk? Because most of the folks that we're trying to talk to aren't really that interested in changing the behavior when we start working on it. So we have to figure out how to get folks interested in it. So I'm using the skills that I learned talking with my colleagues at CABS, but also learning from Scott and his vast, experience working with all of these different problems over the years. And so I really feel like I started out wanting to make a difference, and I truly feel like I'm able to continue to make a difference thanks to everything I learned in CABS. And it started around that conference table in CABS so many years ago. So thank you.
And I have to tell you, Kelly, every time I install a seat or I'm moving it, I hear you in my corner. And you and Brian Lee, I hear the both of you. So I have three brothers in this room, four if you count Kent Lindemann. My three brothers are sitting over here. The next is a real troublemaker. One thing that's really special about these guys, and the one that's going to come up, is we've followed in the safety footsteps. So Dr. Tim Ludwig is a professor at the Appalachian State University, and it's funny, the first time he let me keynote at his conference, I think he was really concerned. I think there was concern that I was going to get the mic. There's always concern when I'm up here, and guys, the secrets are safe. I'm not going to say anything. So I can't say this guy's going to come up, but I will tell you, when he did his Domino's Pizza research, he brought home more Noid, avoid the Noid, that little obnoxious. And I should have worn my Noid shirt. We should have done something, but I still have that Noid. So come on up.
Howdy, my name's Tim. You know, we've been sitting around for like an hour and a half. So let's everybody get up and take a stretch. So stand up and stretch. Do it! Up and stretch. Get up, get your stick, get your arms up, stretch. All right, Scott Geller helped you make a difference in this world. Give us a thumbs up, a big thumbs up. Let's hear it. Now take your thumb and put it on your chin. Your chin's right here. Your chin's right here. And that was my introduction to Scott Geller. I was discerning whether or not it was a good idea to come to Virginia Tech. I went to one of his talks at my alma mater at Lenore Ryan College, and he was in front of a bunch of future school teachers of America and played that little prank, and I knew I had a home. Indeed. I was a cocky young man who thought a lot of himself when I came from Wake Forest experimental program, and what I learned is to be able to shape a cocky young man who thought a lot of himself. Well, you needed a cocky old man that thought a lot of himself to do that. A little frustrating in my first semester here. I was shoveling horse shit for Krista up at the barn, and they had me going out to police departments, getting data in an Elmira study where they were collecting seatbelt data and trying to prove that they had made a difference for state money. The very police officers collecting the data were trying to show a difference. And so being an experimental psychologist, I was a bit frustrated in this world of applied experimental stuff. And then Scott came into our lab one day, and at that point it was a lab. And he says, hey, we got an idea. Let's go check out pizza deliveries. And I like pizza. I said, yeah, let's do this. And I learned there that applied psychology was every bit as rigorous, if not more, than experimental psychology. In order to work out in the world with all the concurrent contingencies and all the distractions, all the politics, we had to come up with research methods that were beyond what I had seen in psychology, even in an experimental program. With pizza deliverers, we got to spy on them from across the street with binoculars. We had a list of license plate numbers that we followed in and out of the pizza delivery restaurant, seeing an individual deliver up to 20, 25 times a night, collecting behavioral data on each one of those instances over the course of 3 months. We had 6 different pizza delivery companies going here in Blacksburg. By the time we got done with our research, we had 3 different universities collecting data on pizza delivers. By the time we got done, Scott and I, the only book I've co-written with Scott, did 10 years of collection of pizza delivers. Being able to follow an individual with their license plate numbers across 3, 4 months, 1 year, 3 years, that's experimental method. Within and between. So my dissertation looked at a number of pizza delivery companies here in the area, and we split them up. And one group we went in and we asked them, hey, you're pizza delivers, you're professionals. You do this for a living. And so what's the one thing you can do to keep yourself in the community safe while you're driving? And they said right away, complete stops. I said, oh, really? Why is that? They gave us about 4 or 5 different reasons. Well, can you tell us like how you remember? What do you do to prompt yourself to come to complete stops? They started talking about intersections where you take a left and that kind of thing. And there was a big list of this. It said, sounds like you want to come to complete stop at intersections. They said, yeah, we do. I said, well, how do you think you do it? They said, we're doing great. They said, no, you suck at this. I was watching you when you were coming in. Scott and I were watching, and you were only doing it 15% of the time. They said, really? I said, really? He said, yeah, that's true. Well, do you want to come up with a goal? A goal, perhaps? And they said, yeah. What should be your goal? 100%. Oh, no, you need goals that are achievable yet tough. So they all voted on the goal. They came with 75%. And I said, can we come in and put up a graph? And every 3 or 4 days, we'll put up your complete stop. So what's going to happen is your manager and your chefs up here, we're going to give them these little clickers. And these little clickers, you're going to click if the driver comes to complete stop when they're leaving or coming back, and they come to complete stop, you click safe. And if not, you click at risk. And every 3 days, I'll come in, I'll collect that data, and we'll put it up here. And here's your goal at 75%. You suck, you're at 15%, go. So we recorded all that, and we had our cadre of undergrads watch the recordings and write a script. We went to the other 3 pizza delivery companies that were at a multiple baseline between subject design, and we lectured that same content. Went in and said, you're professional pizza deliverers. You drive for a living, serve professionals. The number one thing you can do to keep yourself and others safe while you're out there in the community streets here in Blacksburg is come to a complete stop. Here are 4 reasons why, blah, 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 blah. Now, there are some hints that you can use to remember where to come to complete stop, left turn and otherwise. And so it's a good idea to come to complete stop. Manager, what do you think? Yes, come to complete stop. So how are they doing? Well, they suck. They're at 15%. Okay, so manager, what should be the goal? 75%. All right, so we're going to give the manager and their chefs these safe and at-risk clickers, and we're going to put this graph and go, you got to get to 75%. Which group came to complete stop more? The group that participated or the group that was mandated? What do you think, Brian? Most people say, the group that participated, people working together for safety is the way to go. No, exactly the same amount of complete stops in both cases. But we didn't really care about that, because think about it. Your manager's going to watch you and give you feedback on your complete stops. The group that got mandated had more complete stops. But we were more interested in the spread of effect, because our cadre of undergrads going out, looking at license plate numbers, were not only coding the complete stops, but they were also coding the turn signal use, the safety belt use, the driving distance up and down the street, and whether or not they came into complete stop up the road. And the group that got mandated, decreased significantly their turn signal use and their safety belt use. When I do my speeches on this, I say there's a word in psychology for the psychological reactance when you tell people they have to do something, and so they have to do it, but they find their way around it with counter control in the background, and it's called. The group that participated, though, increased significantly. Steve Clark helped me with the stats. Their turn signal use and safety belt use. We wrote a book on that. I built a career around that. And we wrote grants to the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health back when it existed. And the most joy I've ever seen this young man ever exhibit in front of his students or me as an adult afterwards was when we were up to the minute of the noon deadline that the Office of Sponsor Programs required us to have these 15 different copies of thick 20 single-space page grants with all the appendices and past studies, basically a tome of 200 pages, copied 15 at a time. We were up against the deadline. They said noon is the last time, so we're running from Daring Hall with all this paper, getting into sponsor programs, breathing. We probably had to go by Scro to get a signature at the end, too, and he did it real slow, didn't he? Right? And we slap it down, and Scott and I give each other a high five. Scholarship. So I didn't really want to do safety. I just found it an applied laboratory. But there was something special about the folks we did it with. We were just a lab back then. And suddenly, in addition to the alcohol research and environmental research, Now we had some 60 undergrads going out and collecting data on pizza deliverers. And we were sitting around Daring Hall. There's a table out there. Myself, Tom Berry. We had Bob Evans, who went on, Mike Gilmore, myself, and Steve Clark, Scott Geller, sitting around a table. We said, hey, you know, we're not just a lab. We gotta name this something, because we were just called Gellerites, or the school psychologists called us Geller's Gestapo, because we were kind of, you know, we'd go take over everybody's class and the like. So we needed to come up with something. We needed to become something. So Tom Berry suggested Chautauqua, and we voted that down. So you're welcome, cabbies. Been quite a t-shirt though, right? Actively Chautauquaing. And we argued and argued about it. I don't remember it, Tom. We argued about it. We decided we were center because we had 7 different streams of research. You hadn't done my pizza delivery studies that everybody was contributing to. We had the late Ken Glitterman and Steve's alcohol research, which everybody was contributing to. I did it for the after parties personally. Right? We people out there flashing. Tom was spying on somebody for years, and 2 years on end, just following the same person back and forth from the thing. And we were a center. We were a center of funded research of undergrad. What's that? And we had JABA. We had the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, a premier journal in behavioral science, where Scott was the editor and Tom was the co-editor, the editorial assistant. All I remember is Tom worried about the fibers coming through the ceiling and taping it up. We were a center, and we were proudly applied. Make a difference. Never thought scholarship would really make that much of an impact immediately, and you could prove it. We were applied. We were behavioral. We're all grandchildren of B.F. Skinner, through Nate Asrin, through Scott Geller, and we were systems. Scott introduced us not only to B.F. Skinner, but also to W. Edwards Deming, who impacted many of our lives, impacted the consulting careers of many of us, and he taught us that systems were the things that create the environments that occasion behavior. So we created CABS, 1989 or 1990, Tom. I'm not sure, but this myth of this 1987, sorry. We were there. We were there. I've had the distinct pleasure of introducing Scott at conference after conference after conference. He's introduced me, we've introduced Krista, we've introduced everybody here, and we've remained a community. And to be able to stand by Scott when there's 2,000 safety professionals on their feet cheering has always been a distinct pleasure. But I think today, seeing peers, old friends, new friends, all celebrating this man's work, this man's life, this man's impact, this man's legacy, it has to be the seminal moment in my relationship with him. Never beat him in tennis. I'm 30 years into my academic career, so I only got 26 more. I might get there. Scott, we love you. Thank you very much.
You guys are so awesome. We have about 8 more speakers and 25 minutes scheduled on the program. But we're having fun. So take your time, but just giving an FYI on the timing here. Thanks. Thanks, Krista.
Okay, I'm going to go quick. I'm just going to say your license plate for several years was JABA 89, because that was really cool. So Dale Gray, you're up next. And I think when I always think about you, I believe Dad cut his teeth with you when you worked at Ford. And that's something you say often. So you just come on up here and in the chance of time, give us your spiel.
Thank you, Krista. First, I'd like to applaud all the previous speakers. You did a tremendous job. I've learned and appreciate more of your research than ever before. So my hat's off to you. I am the former corporate safety director of Ford Motor Company. Scott and I met back in 1978. And we had begun as Ford Motor Company, a very extensive safety belt program. At that point in time, it was not a law, certainly, but 6% of Ford employees, we had 250,000 at that time, 6% were wearing safety belts. And at that point in time is where I met my friend, Dr. Geller, and with his help and the total involvement and support of the top management of Ford Motor Company, that percentage rose to 73 in 1 year, truly remarkable. And it was looked upon as one of the best safety programs, safety belt programs in the country. And thanks again to the help and leadership of Dr. Geller. Now, the other thing I know, his real passion is actively caring. And when I think of actively caring, that's synonymous to Dr. Geller. And there are a lot of examples for that. Could talk a long time, but rather than go through, he's made a difference, as we all know, in hundreds and hundreds of lives. But I want to tell you one personal story. And it goes back to 1992. My wife had passed away unexpectedly. And when Dr. Geller, Scott, found out about this, he made a call to me asking what he might do, and he was caring about me. And we had that conversation. It gets very important after this. He told me he had a speaking engagement at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, and he would like to spend some time with me after that event was over, which I graciously accepted. Again, it was February in Michigan, not a very good time to drive. There was no chance of getting a taxi cab from Kalamazoo to where I lived in Dearborn, Michigan, some 120 miles. So that was out of the question. Lyft had not come about. Uber had not come about. One more chance perhaps to rent a car, but GPS was not around at that time either. Going back to that time, he won't be offended. He was somewhat geographically challenged. He had an honorarium of $1,500 from Western Michigan for his presentation. He was able to find someone from Western Michigan to drive him the 120 miles to my house, and he forgave the university that $1,500 just so he could come to my house and care about me. That's actively caring. So Scott, in the next phase of your life, which is retirement, you're in for one hell of a nice ride. You have to enjoy it, make the most of it. Every day is a gift. Again, make the most of every day. And as Johnny Weissmuller, the greatest Tarzan of all time, some of you don't remember, the greatest Tarzan of all time, said to all these aspiring actors, don't let go of the vine. Good luck, good health, and buckle up, my friend.
I'm not going to introduce these two. I'm just going to let them come on up. But we do have a tennis pro here, Dr. Josh Williams and Dr. Chuck Pettinger. Again, I get the privilege of hanging out with these gentlemen because we do safety and stuff together. So these are two of the best. I'm not gonna say anything I can't.
Thank you, Krista.
Yeah, thanks. So we thought we'd do this together because part of being in the CABS center was the relationships that we built, right? We came after the grandpas at CABS, him and, I see Steve back there, those guys kind of set the stage, and then we came in and kind of took over. Kelly was part of that initiative. But we thought we'd come and talk about how CABS has influenced our consulting and how we applied some of the research. And we thought we'd do a little quick introduction of where we came from, how we got to CABS, and then talk about some of the research. Why don't you?
You're handing it off to me
Yeah,
now?
yeah, you can do a little introduction of yourself.
Couple things real quick. If you're playing Scott in tennis and he starts beating on his heart like this, saying he forgot his heart arrhythmia medicine, don't believe him. It's a ploy. Yeah, so
from a personal perspective, I'll just say, and as great as Neil was and Roseanne and everybody else, Scott talked about statistical gymnastics, and I was falling off the beam a lot and struggling. And I got introduced to Scott through Chuck and Jason D. And just loved Scott right away. Just ton of energy, charisma, still just a great guy, great energy, and doing lots of cool stuff. So me and Chuck got to do real world things like above ground mines. We're doing training, and what we're trying to do is get these grumpy, old, irritated coal miners to use a critical behavior checklist, which, I mean, just doesn't sound good to begin with. And so here's me and Chuck before he was gray and I was gray. These young dudes trying to get these people to observe each other and write down safe stuff and risky stuff, and then go tell your buddy everything you saw. And they're looking at us in a room like this, like, it got ugly. I'll put it that way. We took our lumps. We had to fight our way out a little bit. We made it through, but it was really good preparation, consulting down the road. I'll still talk about a lot of the stuff that Scott preaches, the platinum rule, the Deming thing that Tim referenced. Don't blame people for problems created by the system, which I love, especially talking to executives. We cite some research. I'll make this quick because I know we're low on time, but NIOSH, we did a study looking at, here's the critical behavior checklist. They do some training, go do them. With another group, we had them more interactive training, but we also had them create their own checklists. And we wanted to know which would do more. And the group that created their own checklist, even though it was basically the same as the other one, used it 7 times more than the people that were told to go do it. And that was just a light bulb moment for me. And again, when we're talking to higher ups, both Chuck and I are talking to those senior folks, it's like, you got to get out there and talk to people, get their input. And when you give people choice, 7 times more in our type of research is like the U.S. Olympic team in 1980. Do you believe in miracles beating the Russians? It's crazy. You just don't, or Buster Douglas beating Mike Tyson. It just doesn't happen. It's crazy. So it was a real, again, seminal moment for me in terms of people up here, get down and talk to people, listen to them. You got a lot of smart, talented people if you get that input. So it was a good eye opener for us. Anytime Chuck and I talk about Scott Geller, I know Chuck has the same experience. It's instant credibility for us because he is a heavyweight in the field of safety culture and in the consulting world. He's on the Mount Rushmore. And so by association, it's been good for us. But personally, because like I said, I love Scott. I love cabs, had the best time of my life, but also professionally, it's been very helpful, kind of helping us try to do well. So anyway, that's my little 2 cents. I love you, Scott. When you're ready for some tennis, holler. We'll do one final grand battle. Take your medicine before we start playing.
Pickleball.
Oh, you're right.
So, I don't know if Scott remembers this, but I met him after I finished a exam in intro psychology. I was a little bit late turning it in. So I came up to the front of the room and he looked at me and he said, "Keep it, son." And I said, "Sir, do you know who I am?" And he said, "Frankly, I don't care." I said, "Good." So I shoved my blue book in the middle and I ran out of the door. I had to do it. No, honestly, I don't know if Scott remembers. I actually went to the University of Florida for undergrad. I did a senior thesis. I got people to bus tables quicker by tilting cards for each table as antecedents so they know which ones are going to be up. I increased their performance by like 34%. On my professors that were doing this were Brian Iwata, Ed Malagotti, and Hank Pennypacker. So they all looked at me doing this stuff and said, "You don't want to do this monkey chain, cocaine rat stuff. Go work with Scott. He's doing applied stuff." So that's how I ended up at Virginia Tech. So that was my introduction to experimental behavior analysis, right? And then I saw what we're doing here. And like Josh said, we had a small army, and the stuff that we did in cabs taught us life lessons, how to lead a team of undergraduates, how to do research. Clark trying to teach us how to do statistics on SAS and SPSS. Do you remember having to turn in and going and get like pages of printouts? I mean, we didn't have it on our computers. So we also applied that to our adult lives. I remember going to an Offspring concert in Radford with Christy Maddox and Jason DePasquale. It was me and my wife Terry. And let's just say we had a few beverages, like we were doing some alcohol research apparently. Right? So yeah, we were walking home and we got stopped by Officer Friendly. And he, he said, "Are you going to be driving?" I said, "Yeah, I'll be driving." He goes, "All right, well, we need to do a sobriety test." And he goes, "I want you to, spread your arms out." And I said, "You want me to do go on one foot?" He goes, "No." I was like, "Okay." "You want me to tilt my head back?" "No, just put your arms out." "Okay, now touch your nose." I'm like, "Okay. All right, now I want you to recite the alphabet." "You want me to do it backwards?" And he looking at me, he's like, "Are you being a smart ass?" I'm like, "No, you want me to just say the alphabet?" I said, "Okay, so first research shows that you should do on one leg, tilt your head back, and then try it." He goes, "All right." I'm bringing up the BAC meter. And I said, "I'm about a 0.4. I think I'm fine to drive." And now he was getting a little pissed, right? So he gives me this thing, I blow it, 0.38. Anyway, he let us go because I pulled out the research and said, "I'm fine to drive." So I did learn some of that stuff that Josh talked about, but more importantly, how to get out of a DUI. But anyway, Scott has influenced many people in here. He's influenced my thought process. And like many people said, he influenced my writing behavior. His famous quote to me was, "It's not you, it's your writing behavior." That didn't really make me feel better, but he did shape up my writing behavior. It was a lot more succinct and to the point. And, I stayed away from certain words. But one thing that he did teach many of us is that it's just not enough to care. You have to actively care. And on the behalf of everybody in here, I'd like to say thank you for actually caring for 56 years. You want to close? Oh,
No. By the way, Chuck used to do that. We'd train together and he would say, "All right, everybody group hug." I'm like, "Dang it, Chuck, quit telling people to do a group hug." Now, my final thing is we love you, Scott. Good luck with everything. Again, I think you feel the love from everybody and I'll echo the same. So, thanks.
So if you ever wonder what's wrong with me, you can see this is what I grew up with. So there's the answer. Our next speaker, Steve Roberts, do you want to come on down here? There you are. Come on down. Here's another educator in my life as well. And he doesn't even need an introduction.
Thank you. All right. Tim Ludwig mentioned that he didn't really have an interest in safety. It was more the research methodology, and sort of a good way to use that research methodology was through safety. I'm pretty much the opposite. I came because of safety. I helped put myself through undergrad school as a carpenter, a concrete form setter, an industrial painter. I did all kind of crazy things. I had a hammer dropped on my head one time while building a water treatment facility. I was a repo man, but that was different. Yeah, I was required to climb up on rickety scaffolding and hold on to a 2-ton load of concrete that a crane was fling. That go there, stabilize that. So we can. Instead of 250, what I am now, I was 150 back then. And I'm not going to be stabilizing a 2-ton load of concrete. It's just not going to happen. But I had to get up there and try anyway. So I had in my head all these crazy things that we were required to do, because OSHA really was not involved in these small construction companies back then. And I was always working for a small construction company. And so when I came in with a master's degree, and when I got my master's degree, I really like this behavioral psychology stuff, but I want to know where I can go to apply it further. I want to get my PhD and I want to focus on safety. And when I said that, my professor at the time at West Chester University, Bill Duncan, he said, well, Scott Geller, he's doing this stuff, applying it to safety at Virginia Tech. And so I was thinking other schools, Western Michigan and West Virginia and all that. But when I met Scott and the students here at CABS, and they were all, it wasn't just industrial safety, it was applied to all different types of interesting things. And let me just backtrack a minute to Kent Glendeman, our great late friend. We were all good friends there in the lab. And so it wasn't just working on my industrial safety stuff. I would go to the alcohol parties with Steve and Kent. And one of the most interesting things I remember learning was, and it wasn't just fun parties, it was learning some interesting real world useful things. For example, I learned that, first of all, you can only let the students blow in the PAC meter once, because if you let them do it twice, they'll turn it into a competition and they will try to outblow each other. But I also learned that you can, they would not allow keg parties at Virginia Tech back then. And one of the things they did was they said, all right, we're going to have a keg with the red Solo cups, and we're going to have bottles of beer. And it seems intuitive now, but they found that you actually get less drunk at the keg parties with the red Solo cups, because they would leave half empty cups everywhere. There's a fancy glass bottle. Once you pop it, you made a commitment. But a red Solo cup, that's not worth anything. I'll sit here and leave and walk away. And so you're sort of committed to finish it. And so I'm thinking, well, we should be having keg parties instead of tubs full of bottles. And so again, I regress back to just being involved with all these guys and the interesting research that was done. But my dissertation, done, gosh, from about 92 to 95, finished up in 95, was a safety culture survey that we used for assessing the safety culture of basically industrial organizations, getting back to my main interest of industrial safety. And we used that safety culture survey as a core part of our business. Also, what happened in addition to me getting my PhD in 1995, with Scott and some other colleagues, we started Safety Performance Solutions back in 1995. And we used that safety culture survey as a core part of basically assessing what organizations needed. And so once we figured out what they needed, we would then go in and help them. So we could do some of it. We brought others in, but basically using that. And so we've used that safety culture survey for 30 years now. We just retired SPS last year. But even though we retired SPS last year, Tim Ludwig and I, we have still used that safety culture survey twice in the last year. Once with a boring chemical company, which again is not very exciting. But the other one was with Mexican Coke. And so Latin America, not Mexican, all of Latin America, Coca-Cola. And so that was a pretty cool project as well. And so to sort of wrap up, it's been just a pleasure working with Scott, a great mentor, partner, and friend. So congratulations on an amazing career.
Funny too, Steve, with your safety cultural survey, you were the first person I called when I needed you to come and do that survey in a company I was working for. So that survey's been around. So we have 4 speakers left. We're just going to keep. Okay. All right. So our next speaker, Chris Downey, you want to come up here? There you are. Program coordinator and assistant professor. Just take it away, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here for you. When I talk to Scott on the phone all the time, I call him my leader, my friend, and my mentor. Scott has meant so much to me. When I first got here in the VT program, I was interviewing to come as a grad student. And I didn't fit in with the group of people I was interviewing with. And you know you don't fit in when Tom Owendet looks at you and just shake his head no. So I know I didn't fit in there. But Dr. Helen Crawford looked at me like, you're in the wrong spot. You're not with the right people. And she took me down the hall to Scott, who was dictating emails at that time. And he was gracious enough to take time away from his computer and the grad student and talk with me. And I think I talked with Scott for over an hour, and I left with, what, 4 articles and 3 books? And he was like, make sure you give me feedback by next week. I need to make this better. But thanks to Scott, man, nobody will give me a chance. He gave me a chance, and that has made a difference in my life. So thank you. Just always happy to talk with you and call over the phone anytime. So coming into CALS, back then, your initiation was to do the alcohol research. So working with Scott, working with Kent, working with Steve, doing tailgates every Saturday, missing football games. Getting up 6 o'clock in the morning, talking to Steve, and like, well, I'm off, I'm getting ready to tailgate. I was like, okay, thanks, Steve. But Steve was like, you got this, nothing's gonna fall apart. And nothing did. With the leadership of like Leah, Elise, Tommy, and West, when we had those students here. But my research kind of started alcohol research, then my research started in 2007 when my dad became a victim of credit card fraud. And I was telling Scott, because our family was going through a lot back then. Back then, we didn't have Apple Pay, Google Pay, any of that stuff. You still had to hand your card to the cashier. The cashier would swipe the card. You get a receipt, you had to sign a receipt, give it back to the cashier. Don't believe we had it, we can't believe we had to do that many steps back then. But it has improved now. And I remember sitting in Scott's office and like, we got to do something, Scott, because I want people to be like my dad. They go through all this pain and suffering my family's going through. And Scott was like, okay, let's figure out a way to study this, see what we can do. And I came back with a couple ideas. Scott was like, I don't know about that, man. Going back thinking, and then once article I read was the piece of delivery study. And then I crafted off an idea like, hey, why don't we work with 2 stores? And they just been hit by credit card fraud, so they'd be happy to have us. And we can have one as the control store and one as the intervention site. And the intervention, of course, we used the ABA design. And we could do the intervention with goal setting feedback, just like you did with the pizza delivery people. And he's like, I was like, is that sexy enough, Scott? And he was like, yeah, this sexy, man. And we was on the roll. So we sent almost 85 students, but not at one time, but we sent 2 students at a time to observe the cashiers checking out customers. And they know whether they check for ID or not. And that was our baseline. So did they check? And what we found out in the store, only 0.2% checked at the time, which was very low. But Scott was like, well, we got room for improvement now, which is always a possible way to look at the glass half full. So then we put an intervention in which we're going in, doing goal setting and feedback. So I met every morning with the store and gave feedback like, hey, you checked this many cashiers, good job, or we got to get better, let's improve. So they got positive and negative, I won't say negative, but kind of a neutral message each day during the intervention. And then withdrawal, I just stopped going in the store altogether and giving the feedback. And what we found that we went from 0.2 to 19% when I was going in the store, giving the feedback on how they was doing with the performance. And then when I stopped going, it dropped to about 3%. And Scott was like, we got to get better at this. They were like, we didn't show functional control the way I wanted to. So we did a follow-up study with another restaurant. And this time we had the manager lead the intervention. Again, goal setting feedback. So we had one store, we gave them a stretch goal, which was 50%. And we knew they wanted to reach 50%. But what we found out going in again, just having a prompt by the register and having the manager get the feedback, they went from 2% to 38. And then during withdrawal, they maintained it a little bit at 35%. So we were able to get some kind of type of control there. And what we found out when the manager was present, that were more likely to check for IDs than when the manager wasn't, again, because the manager was holding them accountable. And as you can tell, we came a long way technology-wise. So we don't do reuse Apple Pay, everything's quick now. But what that study has taught me and how I kind of pay it forward in my research now is that I work with like hospitals. I'm interested in the healthcare industry. And when we do projects, they always look at clinical, like what the person thinking. I'm like, well, what's the behavior in this? If we know what they're thinking, how can we improve what they're thinking? So one of the projects I worked on with a hospital in Florida, we had people come in and just diagnose a patient. And then we could control the scenario. So we had the patient develop that sepsis and see what they noticed. Of course, they got questions so we could see what they were thinking, but we also have eye tracker technology on them. So when they were in the room interacting with the patient, were they looking at the spots they were supposed to? Were they doing the correct procedure, the correct behaviors? Because that we could teach. What they're thinking, not too much, because everything's up there in that box. But what we could teach is kind of what they're looking at. Are they looking at the screen, checking oxygen level? So with that, and also working with my students, the feedback, yes. So I still work with Scott doing manuscripts. So he moved on from taking your paper, writing in red ink to using track changes now. Yes, he uses technology now. I was shocked. So now just think about getting a Word document and it's comments on top of comments on top of comments on top of comments with still everything all read out. And I'm like, you know what? Let me see the clean version of this. I can see what he changed. But every time I call Scott, he's always there and he's made an impact in my life. And I think I'm the only student that lost to him in tennis and beer pong, probably. But I know we run a show on top, but thank you, Scott. I really appreciate you and for everything you had done to my life. It's made a difference.
So I think we should add Chris to your email distribution whenever you get a spam. Because it's incredible how he actually writes these spam emails back. Do any of you get copied on some? Oh, good. So he's part of this. The time you take to write a paragraph back to a spammer is incredible to me. And then he copies a bunch of people and the scammers are like, well, now we got his daughter and this, so thanks for that. Ivan, come on up here, Ivan. Ivan's one of our current cavies, one of Dad's current cavies, and also working very hard with us on our Actively Caring for People Foundation. So I'm going to let him talk to you about that, and thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to acknowledge, since I'm one of the less experienced speakers here, to put it lightly, that just thank you for your attention. And there's also about 5 current and former CABS coordinators there that could have done this job just as well as I could have, but so this is a right place at the right time moment for me. And thank you, Doc, for choosing me to summarize our current research. So CABS, everybody knows what CABS is? Maybe not. This is the Center for Applied Behavior Systems. So what do? We go out into the community and we observe behavior, specifically behavior that we believe we can change to improve human welfare, right? In recent years, well, fairly recent years, quite a while now, CABS has been observing prosocial behavior, particularly interpersonal expressions of gratitude. We've done this in a multitude of settings. There's been a variety of studies now spanning many years. And the first of them that I want to talk about is gratitude expression in the crosswalk. So you know what I'm talking about. When a car stops for you, do you do this little wave to the driver that stopped for you, right? So about 5 years ago, CABS research concluded with over 120,000 observations, they found that 15% were expressing gratitude. And they figured, well, that's a little low, right? So they implemented a behavioral prompt in the form of a sign that very simply said, please remember to thank drivers with a wave. And over the next 93,000 observations, an absurd sample size that's only possible due to our fleet of undergraduate students, they found that it increased to 21% of pedestrians expressing gratitude. So from 15 to 21%, that's the power of a very simple behavioral prompt, just reminding people to participate in the behavior. Jack Wardell, one of Dr. Geller's current PhD students, expounded upon this research, and he was looking at how might you react to witnessing an expression of gratitude. So imagine this, if somebody in front of you walks into the crosswalk and thanks that driver, what are you more likely to do? Are you going to follow suit and thank them as well? In psychology, we would call that modeling. Or are you going to decide, well, they've already thanked the driver, there's no need for me to do that anymore? We call that diffusion of responsibility. So what Jack has found is that it's not really one or the other that necessarily prevails, that actually both effects are present in the situation. So let me explain. The first person that enters the crosswalk, if they thank the driver, that actually increases the likelihood that everyone else in that group thanks the driver. So that's modeling. And likewise, if the person directly in front of you thanks the driver, that makes you more likely to thank the driver than if the person in front of you had not thanked them. However, the diffusion of responsibility is still present in the sense that as group size increases, so I'm sure you see this, there's a car stopped and there's just, upwards of 200 undergraduates just moseying along. As group size increases, everybody's likelihood to express gratitude decreases, right? So, I have also explored this situation, and my research has focused primarily on, well, what kind of human and environmental factors might predict or at least correlate with expressions of gratitude in the crosswalk. And what I've found overwhelmingly, I think many people in this room will be proud of themselves to hear, that it seems that older individuals, or at least individuals that appear older, remember, we're only observing, express gratitude much more than college-aged individuals, much more. And likewise, campus, those walking on campus, 18% of them are expressing gratitude. Compared to those crossing the street downtown, 50% of them are expressing gratitude. Right. So the implications there are interesting. There would have to be more research, but we know at the very least that campus may not be a very gratitude-friendly environment, and that young people may not be expressing gratitude as often, right? So my fellow coordinator, Ellie Townsend, is conducting research in the dining halls, observing cashier interactions, similar to Chris Downing, except we're looking at interpersonal expressions of gratitude again. And so what Ellie has found over the past year, that this fairly new study, what she's found is that those wearing headphones during this interaction, regardless of if they do this to take one off or if they have one AirPod in, it doesn't matter. If they have headphones, they're expressing gratitude much less frequently than those who are not wearing headphones. So now Ellie is also implementing a behavioral prompt to attempt to decrease headphone usage in this interaction and increase gratitude expression. So one of our most significant studies that I'm sure many of you are familiar with is called Thank Your Professor. This has spanned many years. Dr. Geller has done all kinds of thank you cards that we've dug up from the dredges of Williams Hall. But in the last half decade or decade or so, we've been focused on thanking professors. So what this entailed is undergraduate students customizing a thank you card and writing something nice, and then turning it over to their professor. And additionally, we asked them to complete a self-report questionnaire, by the way, self-report survey. He says he doesn't do them, he does. Before and after this interaction, assessing their subjective well-being. And overwhelmingly, what we found over multiple iterations of study, many years, first of all, professors are always very grateful and show sincere thanks for this interaction. But second of all, undergraduates always or show an increased level of subjective well-being after this interaction. Now, this is big for us because this supports our positive psychology hypothesis, or not ours, but the long-standing one, that expressions of gratitude benefit both the giver and the receiver of gratitude. So do you want to talk about applied science? Go apply this to your life. If you don't remember the last time you've given someone a thank you card, we've shown that it is very effective. And additionally, I wanted to mention that this project was presented at the American Psychological Association 2 years ago and won a poster award. So that was a big deal for Laura Lee Hoffer there. Yeah, and as you have heard, CABS doesn't always focus on gratitude either. Dr. Elise Drake mentioned environmental studies. We're still at Kroger, but now, now for over a decade, CABS researchers have been trying to increase the use of reusable bags. Talk about framing, right? So they've tried a multitude of interventions. I'm talking about giving out reusable bags to customers, displaying a poster cautioning customers about the environmental dangers of plastic bag use, using direct behavioral feedback by displaying week by week in the Kroger the percentage of plastic and reusable bags used, and having people sign a pledge to use fewer plastic bags. Unfortunately, none of these interventions have been particularly effective. And we figured now that people do actually have these reusable bags and they know that they're supposed to use them. So maybe the problem is that they're forgetting to bring them. So our research now is focusing on handing out, hang tags, kind of like a parking pass to put in your car, reminding you to bring your reusable bags. And the effects of that are yet to be seen. But yeah, speaking of questionnaires, psychological safety is a concept that many of you who work in industry are, I'm sure, very familiar with. Psychological safety refers to the given comfort somebody experiences in a group setting, or more specifically, are you learning? Are you contributing? Are you included? And do you feel comfortable to challenge the status quo? So our researchers are now applying this to higher education, and a preliminary self-report questionnaire conducted by Tyler Parker Rollins there found fairly intuitively that students in smaller classrooms with more appreciative professors and in less technical courses experience greater psychological safety. So now we're expounding upon this research, and a behavioral checklist is being designed to attempt to find which of these behaviors that students and professors exhibit reflect psychological safety so that we can attempt to increase it in the classroom. So as for the future of CABS, I'm sure many of you are not at all surprised to hear that Dr. Geller has chosen to continue to donate his time after retirement and work with us to continue to do research. And as far as he's concerned, we're going to continue as long as we have student interest, university support, and we are successful in cultivating research leaders. Thank you.
Is it just me or Ivan, or are they doing a lot more than you guys ever did? Was it just the way he presented it? Because I mean, it was quite robust. Technology, is that what it is? It was something. Samuel, why don't you get on up here and talk about what you've been doing? Where's he? There you are. Come on up here and kind of give more about
Thank you, Krista. First, to introduce myself, my name is Samuel Browning. I'm a PhD student in the clinical science program. And before I talk about our other research on gratitude, I just wanted to take this moment to express my own gratitude to Doc. I mean, Doc, you've been instrumental in my life, and I owe so much to you. So thank you, Doc. And so as discussed up to this point, Doc has long emphasized the importance of applying behavioral science to improve human welfare. However, Doc has also recognized that positive psychology, or the scientific study of human well-being, is equally vital in achieving this goal. And that is why we have recently dedicated so much time and effort at CABS studying gratitude. And so in addition to investigating interpersonal gratitude in the community, we have also explored intrapersonal gratitude. And what is intrapersonal gratitude, and how is it different from interpersonal gratitude? Well, while interpersonal gratitude focuses on giving thanks and reciprocating acts of kindness, intrapersonal gratitude is about experiencing thoughts and feelings of deep appreciation. And so researchers have developed various exercises based on these two different types of gratitude. For instance, counting your blessings is an example of an intrapersonal gratitude exercise, whereas writing and delivering a thank you letter is an example of an interpersonal gratitude exercise. Fellow CABS graduate researcher Jack Wardale, who I believe is here today, found that participants who were assigned to count their blessings once a week reported greater life satisfaction by the end of the study, while those who wrote the thank you letter once a week reported greater perceived social support. Researchers have also designed self-report surveys to assess an individual's general tendency toward both types of gratitude. So an example of an intrapersonal gratitude statement is, I often have moments when I realize just how fortunate I am to be alive. Whereas an interpersonal gratitude statement is, when someone helps me, I'm quick to express my thanks. Now you might ask, are some people naturally inclined to score higher on one type of gratitude than the other? And in my research, I found evidence suggesting that to be the case, as individuals who are more enthusiastic and open to experience tend to score higher on intrapersonal gratitude, while those who are more compassionate and conscientious tend to score higher on interpersonal gratitude. So as you can see, Jack and I have found that when investigating gratitude, it is important to consider both types. So as a part of my own dissertation, I'm excited to be the first to test whether the different types of self-reported gratitude are linked to real-world behavior. So for this study, we're inviting community members to complete a gratitude survey after we discreetly observe them in real-world situations. And essentially, my research question is this: do people who express gratitude in everyday situations, like saying thank you to a cashier or waving thanks to a driver for stopping at a crosswalk, report being more grateful overall? And if so, is one type of gratitude more strongly associated with these behaviors than the other? Now, my expectation is that the answer will be yes, and that individuals who express thanks to cashiers and vehicle drivers versus those who do not will report higher levels of gratitude, particularly interpersonal gratitude. And such findings would show that what people report about their level of gratitude on a survey does, to some degree, align with how they behave in everyday life. And this would then underscore the value of integrating self-report and behavioral observation methods in future gratitude research. But moreover, if these simple acts of gratitude are linked to higher self-reported gratitude, then this research will further support the notion that applying behavioral science to increase the frequency of gratitude expression in the community can be an effective way to enhance human well-being on a large scale, which is what I believe is what CABS and Doc's legacy is all about. So thank you.
And speaking of legacy, we've talked about all the amazing things that you've done. And now, last but not least, our final speaker, Bobby Kipper, is going to come up and talk about plans moving forward and pushing the Actively Caring for People Foundation, getting it where it needs to go.
Thank you, thank you,
You're
thank
welcome,
you.
Bob.
Thank you very much. Thank you. When Scott asked me to come and share a few words about the direction we're going with a lot of things we've heard today, he said, take as much time as you need. Scott, you didn't tell me it was going to be overtime. Or I don't know, maybe they say you save the best for last, but I don't know why some people are sleeping after. That's okay. My name is Bobby Kipper, and my background is actually in public safety. I spent 30 years in the Commonwealth of Virginia, 26 in Newport News as a police officer, and 4 at the Attorney General's Office of Virginia. My relationship to Dr. Geller is really started on a very personal level. I was a single dad raising 3 kids, and my daughter was going off to college. And I said, well, I got to drop you off to college. That's going to be the hardest thing I've ever done. And I did. I dropped her at Virginia Tech. She became a Hokie. 2 weeks into her stay at Virginia Tech, she calls me. She said, Dad, you need to talk to my psychology professor. I said, really? I said, you've been in the university for 2 weeks. Why in the hell do I need to talk to a psychology professor? He said, when I close my eyes and I listen to his lecture from the lectern, it's almost like I'm hearing you speak. And I said, that's very touching, Jolie. Really is. She said, he wants to meet with you. I didn't know Scott Geller from anybody in the world. I said, okay. I did some research on this man. And I found out that I did need to talk to him. At that time, I started a national center called the National Center for the Prevention of Community Violence. I became the founder and executive director because all my years of investigating homicides and the things that I investigate in communities, I realized that violence is a process and not an event. And if we're doing anything as a society, we need to interrupt that process. And I knew we weren't doing a very good job of that. So how can we do better? I came and Scott had about 30 minutes in the schedule. 2 hours later, we were still talking. I said, something about this, I can't let go. So I told him, he said, man, I've learned about your work and the things you're doing in communities. I need your help. And dissemination. And I said, Scott, this is too good for us to leave. I will take this on, the actively caring model in our organization, and we will start it in communities across America. And we did. During that time, my brothers and sisters in law enforcement were falling under a lot of wrath and criticism over a lot of public profile situations. And I do a lot of lecturing and teaching law enforcement leaders throughout the country and internationally. So something occurred to me. I was riding down the road one day and I said, what about if we took the actively caring model and we introduced it to police? What would that look like? Can you imagine a community policing effort called actively caring for people? That's a bullseye. How do you miss that? So I called Scott on the phone and I said, I got an idea. Those of you who shared ideas with him, he likes those things because if he supports you, it's there. So he said, what do we need to do? I said, we need to write a book. Now, I was an author and I had written several books up to that point. But to this day, I stand here saying that I cannot believe that I had the opportunity to write a book with Dr. Scott Geller called Actively Caring for People Policing. We have used that book throughout America. We started our journey and got 31 police departments in this country on board. We wrote an article in the largest international publication called the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And I wrote the article with Dr. Geller that goes internationally all over the world to top police leaders. And they learned about actively caring for people. A few months ago, probably about almost going on a year now, Scott, we had a meeting up at the lodge and he told me about his future plans. But he told me he needed a vehicle to really advance the future plans. Scott talks a lot about dissemination, and I lay awake at night thinking about what the world would be if we really did it. We came to agreement that he had licensed a foundation for AC4P, but nothing had ever been done with it. That was a long drive home from that meeting because it's not like we don't all have anything on our plate. And I just looked up and said, what are you doing? How can you run from this obligation? So thank you, Scott, for letting me be the first executive director of this foundation. It means a lot to me. But I'm not doing this by myself. I'd recognize some really close people. We're our family, starting with our co-chair, both Dr. Krista Geller and Dr. Carol Geller, and also Dr. Carly Geller, who's going to be the person who's going to advance all of our evaluation projects. And where did he go? My chief strategist over there, Ben Myers, who's just a dear friend, who drove me up here after I got, finally to bed last night about midnight or going on 1 in the morning from speaking in Orlando. You carried my luggage, yeah. That's exactly right. Scott, I will tell you that in the words of the coach of the Redskins for years, who was a legend, George Allen, the future is now. And as I stand here today, I stand here in front of all of you to say, we're going to join our hands together. And we don't want this to be left at the lectern, because we want this to be part of our performance every day. The world has never been in a better place than it can be if we make a commitment to care for one another. And if we have anything to do with it as a foundation, that is our bottom line. By the way, we now have a foundation board with professional athletes, Hall of Fame coaches, executive business professionals. We just got such a great group going. And I want to say that when I do an interview about what my position is with this foundation, one of the things I end the interview with is I'm going to end my comments today. They say, so tell us a little bit about Dr. Geller and some of his work. And as I end those comments, before I leave here today, I'll say to you, Scott Geller's got one problem, and that he's right. He's right. His foundation is solid, and we should all believe in it and do it in all of our communities. Scott, thank you.
Wow, that was just amazing. Let's give another round of applause for E. Scott Geller.
Wow. Oh, what do I say? Except, wow. I mean, thank you. Thank you. And I hope you all see, you do see it's not about me. It's about all of us, man. It's about all of us actively caring, going beyond the call of duty for someone else. And I have to thank Virginia Tech and Jamie for putting this on, for putting it together. And now we move forward and we don't stop here. We talk about it. Check out the posters out there. And tonight, I want you to hear the band sing the song. And we need to find a way. And we're gonna work, James, we're gonna find a way to get this song out there. Because when you hear the song done by the band that he taught us last night how to play this song, I want you to hear it and say, I hope you'll say like in fact, we're doing this song and one of the band players said, Scott, are you okay? You know, we could find another drummer because I was teary-eyed. I was totally emotional, realizing that we have a song that means everything that we're about, that you heard people talking about, and it could spread the word and it can make the world a better place. And one more thing, I am so grateful. So some of my faculty colleagues were able to hear what my students, our students have done over the years, watching behavior and finding ways to improve that behavior. I'll say it again, to make the world a better place. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Scott. So we're going to keep this party going. We're going to move into the other area. We have another request of a special visitor who's outside. And so let's move out there. There's some refreshments. Woo! Oh, there he is. Hey! Okay, we're gonna keep partying, hugging, and caring for each other out in the lobby and get some get some lemonade. I did say at the beginning of this that you guys were good fun. I was not wrong. Aw. Aw. There are instructions on how to get to the ranch and all of the details of that up front. So pick up that if you have any questions about that. Anything else?
Be a shuttle.
There is a shuttle, and the instructions about the shuttle are also on this piece of paper in the they're in the email. Yeah.